Thank you. Back in the 1980s, Dan Sirik and his organization, the Institute of Applied Research, were hired by the state of Texas to solve a problem. And this problem was litter. They were spending over $25 million a year to pick up roadside litter. And on top of that, the problem was growing at a rate of 15% per year. So Dan had a big problem that he had to solve, and we'll get back to Dan in a minute. First of all, let's get into the subject at hand. What is great content all about? So I've got this definition of great content. Great content gets and keeps the attention of your audience, is perceived as valuable, touches their hearts, and inspires them to action. Now let's take this definition and break it down into its component parts. Whoops. Boy, that really jumped fast. Wow, get done with this presentation in a matter of a few seconds here. Okay, first of all, great content gets and keeps the attention of your audience. And when I talk about content, I have more of a broad definition of content. It includes long-form content, short-form, audio, video, whatever the content might be. These principles and models can apply to that content. In the New York Times bestseller, Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath, they talk about one of the aspects of good content or great content that really helps capture your audience's attention. And that is something that is unexpected. But at the same time, with the idea of unexpected content, you don't want it to be gimmicky. And I'm going to show you two examples, one good and one not so good. In fact, one that's actually terrible. And then there's the other concept of once you get somebody's attention, how do you keep their attention? Well, in The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, stickiness was something that he really focused on in part of that book. And he used a couple of children's programs to illustrate exactly what he meant by sticky content and how these children's programs really got the concept well. Well, one of those programs was Sesame Street, and I think we can all agree that Sesame Street was very successful. Well, one of the reasons why it was so successful is the way they produced the program. Child psychologists would say, one thing you never do is mix fantasy with reality. Well, what did Sesame Street do? They mixed fantasy with reality, and it was incredibly successful. It made the program very sticky to the audience, the children's audience that they were trying to reach. Now let's take a look at an example of content that gets and keeps your attention. How many of you fly Delta Airlines? Okay, when's the last time you've flown? Anyone? June? Okay. All right. Some of you may have seen this before. Hang on just a second. There we go. Got a mouse.
Welcome aboard, and thanks for flying with Delta. Our first priority on every flight is safety. So before we depart, I'll be giving a brief safety presentation. Okay, be sure all carry-on items are securely stowed in an overhead bin, and place smaller items under the seat in front of you. And ensure all aisles, exits, and bulkhead areas are clear. Ensure your mobile phones and electronic devices are turned off. If you're seated at an emergency exit, please review the responsibilities for emergency exit seating on the back of the safety information card, which is in your seat pocket.
Are you willing and able to assist with the operation of the exit if necessary?
Yes.
Not really. If you're unable to perform these functions, please let us know, and we'd be happy to find you another seat.
Hey.
As we leave the gate, make sure your seatbelt is fastened. To fasten, insert the metal tip into the buckle and adjust the strap so it's low and tight across your lap. To release the belt, just lift the top of the buckle. Please remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened anytime the seatbelt sign is on. And even if the sign is off, please keep your seatbelt fastened in case we experience unexpected rough air. For everyone's safety, federal regulations require all passengers to comply with the posted placards and lighted information signs located throughout the cabin, in addition to any crew member instructions. Smoking is not allowed on any Delta flight. And federal law prohibits tampering with, disabling.
Okay, I think you got the message here. Now, how many of you wanted to keep watching the video? Okay, just about everyone. Notice how Delta really got your attention with the unexpected here. And not only did they get your attention, but they kept you engaged by continuing to throw in one unexpected element after another. Did anyone notice no chainsaw juggling? Yes, okay. All right, well, let's go on to an example that is what I would refer to as gimmicky. And you'll see what I mean in a minute here. Okay, cursor, where are you? There you are.
In an effort to get people to remember our name, Outpost.com, we contacted the local high school marching band and asked them to help us out. And to help make this memorable, we decided to release a pack of ravenous wolves. That's good stuff.
Okay, now that was interesting. Gimmicky for sure. Does anyone know what Outpost.com sells? Or used to sell, I should say. They're no longer in business. Did anyone catch that at the end? Okay, some of you did, but most people completely missed that because they're horrified by this crazy commercial that has just been thrown in front of them. So don't use the element of surprise, but don't get gimmicky. So now let's look at what I would consider the most important aspect of great content, and that is your audience. A lot of times in marketing, I hear this question asked of me, why not just market to everybody? I mean, more eyeballs, more reaction, more bodies, and it's just going to result in better results. Well, the problem is when you do that, first of all, it's more expensive because you've got to try to get bigger lists and get in front of better people. And second of all, you're not really talking to anyone because when you try to talk to everyone, you end up talking to no one. So it's really important to focus your attention on a particular group of people when you're getting your message, trying to get your message across. And Bruce Tognazzini is one of the original architects of the Apple operating system user interface. And Bruce and his team spent hours and hours defining who their target audience was. And they actually had different segments of their audience and would go and define each one of these segments. And what they did in addition to that is they would bring people in from representatives from these various segments, and they would test them on their user interface designs. They had incredibly high standards. In fact, their standard was 100% success rate. If one member of the testing group failed the test, they would take the design back and do it over again. But what did they get? They got an interface design, the essence of the Apple OS, which today is very much the same design that existed back in the 1980s. So, and part of what allowed them to do this is they really knew who their audience was, and they focused their attention on that audience. So, another thing you have to look at is why are you targeting them? I mean, so you've got maybe a collection of different audiences that you want to target. Well, what's your objective for your campaign or for your program or whatever it is you're trying to accomplish? What is the objective there? What audience is most likely to respond to that objective? That's the people or the group of people you want to go after. And just to go back to Dan now and his problem with the litter, Texas litter problem. Dan did his research, and what he discovered was that the number one category of people who were the biggest litter bugs were 18 to 35-year-old males, drove pickup trucks, listened to country music, and liked sports. And they were anti-authoritarian types. So more than likely they had Confederate flags in their back windows and gun racks. But this was the audience, this was the reality that Dan had to deal with. Somehow he had to get a message across to these people to change their behavior. Whoops, get a little ahead of myself there. And do you really know who your target audience is? I really got messed up on my notes here. This never happens in my class at Davenport University. Okay. In his book, Crossing the Chasm, Jeffrey Moore identifies some concepts when it comes to the relationship between products and individuals within a target group. And the book is actually designed based around technology products and how to introduce those technology products into the market. And his theory goes something like this. You introduce a product into the marketplace, there are certain groups of people who are more likely to respond to that product than others are likely to respond to that product. And essentially, that this is a model of his model. You've got the innovators and early adopters, who are the people that you want to reach first of all with your product or your messaging. Then, as you move up the curve in the product life cycle, there's these little gaps between these various elements of your audience, and these are referred to by Jeffrey Moore as chasms. And if you don't make it over to the next level in your across the chasm, you're going to fail to reach that next audience group. Well, Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point kind of took Jeffrey Moore's concept and model, and he applied it to messaging. And he essentially said that there are groups of people who are in the innovators and early adopters collection there. And these individuals are going to help you get your message across the chasm and over to the next collection of people in your audience. And he identified 3 individuals. He identified mavens, and those are the individuals who collect knowledge and like to distribute that knowledge to others. And all of you probably know a maven or two, kind of the know-it-all types. And then you have the connectors, those who seem to know everybody. And if you ever need to get in touch with someone or you need to connect with someone, you connect with a connector. And then you have the last group of people, the salespeople. And these are the people who just naturally enjoy selling and talking about things that they really like and selling people on their concepts, and usually they're salespeople too. And so these groups of people help move that messaging across the chasm to the rest of the group. And they're what are known as translators, and that's what Malcolm Gladwell refers to them as. And he refers to a story to illustrate how the translation of a message really takes place. Several years ago, the city of Philadelphia started a needle exchange program. And what they would do is they'd have these mobile vans that would drive around the city to these various neighborhoods, and they would set up shop and they would exchange new needles for old needles. And the whole intent of the program was to try to slow and to stop the spread of HIV/AIDS by means of intravenous drug use. What they discovered was that over time, they had these people showing up with these bagfuls of needles, hundreds of needles, and they would exchange them and get the new ones, and then they would disappear into the neighborhood. So they decided to figure out, what were these people doing? Well, it just so happened that these people were taking the needles. They knew where all the addicts lived in their neighborhoods. They would go to the addicts and they would sell them for $1 a piece, and of course in exchange for a used one. Then they would take all the used needles back to the pickup point, exchange them, and get a whole bunch of them, a whole bunch of new ones. Well, these people were the translators of the message of the program, if you will, to the individuals in their neighborhoods. And so what you need to think about is, who are the translators in your target audiences? In the publishing industry, particularly in Christian publishing, pastors are a big translator group. They're a group of influencers that we want to try to reach. And Zondervan, they're big. Professors are also a big translator group, because if you can get a professor to adopt a book, hey, you automatically guarantee that a bunch of students are going to be buying that book. And there may be other types of individuals. Bloggers are big these days. Okay, let's move on to the next part of the definition. Great content is perceived as valuable, touches their hearts, and inspires them to action. And when I say there and them, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about your target audience. Sometimes we forget that we are not our target audience. And we have to remember that. And I didn't mention it before, but I'm going to mention it now. One of the things that experts do to help once they've identified their target audience and learned all they can about them is they give that individual, or they give that collection of characteristics a name. And in the case of Dan and the Texas roadside litter problem, they named their persona Bubba. Well, I suppose that fits for a pickup driving, sports loving country music person from Texas. So when you start crafting your content, these are some things to keep in mind. And these are taken from the book Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. New York Times bestseller, great book, great information in there. First of all, you want your content to be simple. You really want to boil it down to its essence. And one organization that was really good at doing this, in fact, they're still good at doing this, is Southwest Airlines. If you want to know what Southwest Airlines is all about, there is one phrase that you need to remember, and that phrase is this: we are the low-fare airline. Everything about Southwest revolves around that one phrase. It boils down the essence of who they are. So think in terms of how you can take your messaging and boil it down to its simplest parts. You also want to make a message concrete. Some things are really difficult to package in the form of a concrete message. And one example is prejudice. How do you explain prejudice to someone in a very concrete way? Well, in 1968, shortly after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., there was a teacher who wanted to do just that. And what she did, and I'm not going to say this was a good thing, but I'm just going to tell you what she did. She divided her class into two groups of people. She put brown-eyed students on one side, blue-eyed students on the other side. And she said, brown-eyed students, you are the cream of the crop, you are the best, and I'm going to give you these extra privileges. You are superior to the blue-eyed students. Blue-eyed students, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take some privileges away from you. You just don't match up to the brown-eyed students. Well, much to her surprise, shortly after this occurred, friendships that had been in place for months suddenly started to be separated along color lines. And the brown-eyed students started treating the blue-eyed students badly. Well, then she came in and said, you know what, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Really, it's the blue-eyed students who are the superior students. And brown-eyed students, I'm sorry, but I'm gonna have to take all these privileges away from you and give them to the blue-eyed students because they're the superior ones. And you would think that the blue-eyed students may have learned a little empathy after being beat on, figuratively speaking, by the brown-eyed students. Well, it wasn't the case. Soon, the blue-eyed students started to treat the brown-eyed students just as bad as they were treated. And then, of course, she said, well, this was all an experiment. You're all equal, and you're no different from each other. But she had taught them something. Well, researchers, social scientists, wanted to see if they really did learn something. So they followed these students throughout the years, and as adults, they questioned them again, and they discovered that they were far less prejudiced in their thinking and in their attitudes than the general population. So her message on an abstract concept was delivered in a concrete manner. You also need to have a message that's credible. And one way the NBA did this years ago, or in fact they probably still do this, is they have an orientation session for all incoming rookies. So what they do is they sequester them at a hotel. They have to stay on the property. They take away their cell phones, and they really dictate their schedule while they're in here for the orientation. And of course, they talk about the dangers of casual interactions and the dangers of contracting venereal diseases and especially HIV/AIDS. Well, it's kind of hard to keep a secret when you've got a whole bunch of NBA players in one place. Well, word gets out, and sure enough, in the lounge, waiting for the players after they're done with their daily session, there's a group of young ladies dressed to kill, just waiting for these NBA players. And of course, the NBA players are delighted by the attention, and there's a few phone numbers that are exchanged, but because of their tight schedule, nothing can happen. They have to get back to their rooms. Well, the next morning, they file into the conference room, and there before them are the same ladies who were in the lounge the night before. And they were a bit surprised by that, and one by one, they stepped forward. My name is Annette. I'm HIV positive. My name is Jolene. I'm HIV positive. My name is Ann. I'm HIV positive. Suddenly, that message that they were getting from the NBA was credible to them. They knew that this was serious business and that casual interactions could indeed get them into some serious trouble. Emotional. We're going to see an example of how Dan was able to bring emotion into his story to really get Bubba to react with the messaging in a minute. We'll see a video on that. But essentially, you want to be able to bring that element of emotion into your messaging. And story. And I'm not going to talk about story because Amelia's going to cover that topic in a 30-minute presentation here shortly. But just when you think of story, think of Jared and Subway. Great story. Okay, let's see how Dan finally was able to reach Bubba.
Randy White and Jujo Jones? What's a couple of football stars doing out here alongside the road?
Picking up after some folks who really don't seem to care much about Texas.
Oh, you mean the litter?
Yeah, you see the guy who threw this out the window. You tell him I got a message for him.
Don't mess with Texas?
That's the message.
I got a message for him, too.
What's that?
Well, I kind of need to see him to deliver it.
Don't mess with Texas.
Don't mess with Texas. That was the messaging. And there were several other spots that were created as well with country western star Willie Nelson and additional sports stars and others. But again, you catch the emotion there. You know, Bubba's not going to pay any attention to the Native American with a tear running down his cheek, or the pitch in, or the give a hoot, don't pollute kind of approach. But this is the kind of thing that's going to get Bubba's attention. And we'll see how much attention it really got. And I should say, too, in Dan's case, remember we talked about translators. Dan chose translators that Bubba could relate to, in this case, sports stars, Ed Tutal-Jones and Randy White, both from the Dallas Cowboys. And again, they were Texas stars. They weren't just any stars. They were from Texas as well. So he used them to help deliver the message across the chasm to Bubba. And the effect of that was quite astounding. And before we get to that, 73% of those who were polled after the campaign started airing recognized the message and could tell what it was about and knew it. And an astounding 25% reduction, or 29% reduction in roadside litter was experienced that year that the campaign was launched. Incredibly effective. Bubba got the message. Triangle of relevance. So you craft this message, you get everything the way you want it, you're taking user interest into consideration, but how do you really make the content relevant? And how do you bring in the aspect of business interest? Because even though you're a nonprofit, you're in the business of getting people to do things like give donations or to volunteer or to do something to help you out. Well, Angie Schottmuller, she's a social media guru based in the Twin Cities, came up with this model called the Triangle of Relevance. And in addition to user interest, we have this aspect of time significance. Well, time significance could mean anything from a particular date to an event to a time of year, anything that can really put the messaging into a context of time. And then we have the aspect of business interest. And business interest could be donations, it could be, again, volunteering, selling something. And in the case of Dan and Bubba, the business interest was behavior change. And obviously, from the results, it was successful. So putting it all together, know your audience. Target your influencers, or those people who can transition the message when you know who they are. And get and keep the attention of your audience. Craft content that is simple, concrete, credible, emotional, that's in the form of a story. And craft content that includes user interest, business interest, and time significance. And that's it. Thank you very much.